Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about a technique that is one of my favorite techniques, but it has a lot of haters out there. There's a lot of people that don't like fishing this technique, and I don't understand it. I really don't. But we're going to be talking about the Carolina rig. It's a classic. It catches a lot of fish, and I still don't understand why people think it is boring. I get it, dragging something on the bottom isn't as, fast and furious as throwing a chatterbait down a grass line or throwing a topwater or something like that. But let me tell you, I think the Carolina rig is far from boring. I mean, what other technique can you have such a feel of the bottom than a Carolina rig? That tactile factor when it comes to dragging this rig really allows you to be engaged with what's on the bottom. Feel those transitions from soft to hard and vice versa. You can count every single shell down there, every single rock, stump. I just think that it is so engaging when I'm fishing it, and it's one of those techniques I have just the ultimate confidence in when I'm fishing out deep and primarily fishing for fish that are focusing in that bottom region, and if I'm trying to cover water and understand the bottom, there's just nothing better than a Carolina rig. So I don't get it. I don't understand why people hate it. Comment below if you have your opinion on the Carolina rig. I do want to hear why you think it may be a little bit boring, but to me, that feel factor, that really makes it exciting for me. But anyways, because this is a technique that I fish a lot, and we're probably going to hear a lot of noise in the background, I'm sorry about that. I've got some guys that are doing some mulching on the property today, but I wanted to go through my full Carolina rig setup, and some of this gear, this tackle that I'm going to be talking about changes from situation to situation, but I'm going to start off with what kind of stays consistent in my setup. First off, let's talk about the rod. With a Carolina rig rod, I've tried a lot of different options out there. I've done a ton of fishing with 7-foot rods and 3-foot rods, but really I've settled on a 7/6 medium heavy as my Carolina rig rod. I don't like using like a flipping stick. I don't think you need to go that stiff, but I found the perfect rod with Fitzgerald. This is the all-purpose series, the 7/6 medium heavy, and I think it gives me the perfect blend of having the flex that I need to make a long cast and to kind of load this whole ball and chain, load it out there and get it way out there, and so it has that soft tip. It allows this rod to load up for a good cast, but it also has plenty of backbone to feel every little rock, every little stick down there, whatever you're dragging this thing over, and so it has a lot of sensitivity and it gives you a good hook set. So the 7/6 medium heavy is kind of what I've settled on over the years. Any rod in that medium heavy to heavy action range is going to be okay. It's going to be suitable for this, but this is the rod that I've chosen after fishing this rig a lot. Again, we're going to be hearing quite a bit of noise in the background, so I apologize for that. But my property is going to be looking pretty sweet after this. I'm really excited to go check it out. In fact, I might even do a little, iPhone video. I'll record some for you so you can check it out. As far as the reel goes, I like to use either a 7:2-to-1 gear ratio Fitzgerald VLD10, or I'm using the 8.1-to-1 gear ratio. Generally, if I have an option, if I'm already not using up all my 8-to-1 gear ratios, I'm going to go for that one just for efficiency purposes, but a 7.2-to-1 will work as well. All right, so now we get into kind of the things that change a little bit, but first I'm going to talk about the main line that I'm going to be using, because I'm going to be using a different main line than I am for the leader generally. The main line, with a Carolina rig, this thing is going to be dragging on hard, abrasive objects, and so I'm not really worried about line size as far as those fish being line line shy with the main line. So I'm going to be using like 20-pound test Seaguar AbrazeX because of that abrasion resistant quality of that line. That's what I like to use for the main line. And you know, sometimes I'll go down to 17, but I'll rarely go down to like a 15-pound range. To me, that's just too light. You know, you'd really have to retie quite often. And then we get to the, you know, weight and bead and all this section right here. All right, so personally, you know, there are caveats to this. There are situations where I will fish a very, very lightweight. Like when I'm down in Florida, if I'm fishing, you know, a thick grass edge or something like that, I'm really not trying to dig this rig into the bottom. I'm just trying to get it, you know, just keep that bait kind of, you know, free floating. And so I'll use like maybe an 1/8 ounce weight. I'll do something completely different down in Florida, but in general terms, when I'm Carolina rigging, you know, that classic, you know, clean hard bottom area, maybe there's stumps, maybe there's rock, maybe shell, that's the primary situation I'm going to be throwing a Carolina rig. And that's why I just am probably going to be using a 3/4 ounce or heavier weight. Well, I should just say 3/4 ounce or ounce, because those are the two most popular sizes for me. And because we're using tungsten for that feel, that extra like you know, sound you know, effect, I'm also going to be using a bead that is suitable for fishing with tungsten, because glass beads, the old classic glass beads, will chip and they will cut your line with a tungsten weight. So I like to use a Fitzgerald flipping bead in between my weight and my swivel. And as far as the swivel goes, nothing special, just nice brass swivels. As long as it's strong enough, it's good with me. So the leader material, this is super important. So what I like to use is, you know, we're using AbrazeX as the main line, but since the leader material really shouldn't be contacting any of those abrasive objects all that much, you know, I like to use a much lighter line. And also because those fish are probably a little bit line shy, so I want to downsize the leader line a little bit. So I like to use Gold Label from Seaguar. This right here is the 12-pound test that I think is really useful for Carolina rigging. I usually go 12-pound test or 15-pound, but I don't generally go any lighter than that. Number one, Gold Label is super thin for the pound test ratings. So you know, when I'm throwing 12-pound test, it's almost like throwing 10-pound test. So I really don't need to go any weaker than that, any lower in the pound test rating than 12-pound test. As far as the rigs that I'm going to be throwing, as far as the baits that I'm going to be throwing, who knows what I'm going to be throwing from day to day. Generally, it's going to be a creature bait like this that has a little bit of tail action. This right here is the Z-Man boar hogs. It's got these nice little swimming tails on the back. If you split it, let me split this thing. All right, so you got these nice little swimming tails, create a lot of action, but it also just creates a nice kind of subtle glide as it's just kind of gliding above the bottom there. And so that's probably, I'd say 80% of the time when I'm fishing a Carolina rig, I'm fishing something that's a little creature bait with a little bit of action, like the boar hogs. But a lot of times, you know, especially early season when it's a little bit colder, or you know, even late in the summer, I'll fish something that's a little bit more finessey, maybe a straight tail worm, maybe something like the Z-Man Zinkers, you know, a stick bait, something like that. Stick baits and creature baits, those are probably the two most popular options, at least for me, for Carolina rigging. But it all depends on what you think that those fish are feeding on. As far as the hook, I only use offset shank hooks. I kind of go between an EWG like this. This is a Hayabusa EWG hook, and I also use just a traditional round bend offset shank hook, worm hook. I just feel like offset shank is the way to go when you're Texas rigging, which you're essentially, you know, Texas rigging this bait on here, and it keeps it straighter, and that's a big key, because if you get this bait on a Carolina rig, you know, all kinked up and all that, you know, you use a straight shank and the nose is maybe just kind of tipped up a little bit, it's probably going to spin, it's going to create a weird action, and that's not what you want with a Carolina rig. So, you know, I'm sticking with the offset shank options, both narrow and wide gap. But that right there, man, is the setup that I use. Let's talk about leader length real quick, actually, because I almost forgot about that, and that's one of the biggest questions I get is, what about leader length? So my leader length really depends on a couple of different factors. Number one, the water clarity. The clearer the water, the more length I want between my weight and the bait, okay? Because what happens in clear water is those fish can see both the weight and the bait, but I want the bait to have a little bit more subtle action to it, and the longer the leader, the more subtle that action is going to be with the bait. The shorter the leader, the more the weight, you know, every single movement that you make with the weight when you're dragging it is translated straight to the bait, so it just kind of you know, increases the overall action and movement of it. But with a long leader, it's just kind of gliding around and very, very subtle. But clear water, I want that bait to be a little bit further away from the weight, the swivel, and all of that. But in dirtier water, I've had situations in dirtier water where I have a super, super short leader. I might, when it's clear, I might have it, you know, 4 foot long or something like that. But when it's dirty, what I want to happen is I want those fish to first hear the clicking and the grinding of the weight on the bottom, get curious, and then go to investigate, and then as soon as they get up to where they're hearing that weight, all of a sudden that bait just pulls right in front of them. So I may have, you know, maybe even I've fished tournaments with only a 10-inch leader, which is pretty short, but generally, you know, when it's muddy, I'll use like a 14-inch, 16-inch, 18-inch leader, something in that range, but I want it to be a lot shorter when it is dirtier. So that is how I decide on leader length. I don't get too specific. I don't get the measuring, you know, the measuring tape out and measure it. I just kind of, you know, guesstimate. And just remember, the longer the leader, the harder it is to cast this rig without like snagging on your depth finders or light poles or even co-anglers. You don't want to do that. So that also is a factor that I think about. So if it's windier, I'll probably end up shortening the leader just so I can make a longer cast and not, you know, not struggle with that cast. But other than that, that is the way that I choose my Carolina rig setup. And man, it is just one of my favorite techniques out there, and I don't understand why anybody could think it is boring. So thank you guys for watching. I'm gonna go film what these guys are doing right now just to show you guys what we're doing on our property. But as far as this video goes in the Carolina rig, thanks for watching. Drop a comment below. I'm gonna see you out on the water.
All right, guys, this is what all the noise was about. Look at that mulching attachment. Thing is a beast. Just doing a little bit of cleanup in the backwoods here.